We say like this. So welcome all for this evening. Io parlo in inglese, ma è la traduzione in italiano. Okay. So I will introduce myself shortly, and then we start with this beautiful week of the teachings on wellness and lifestyle. And so my name is Elkana Waarsenburg. I'm from Holland. I'm a family doctor, and also specialized in lifestyle and oncology. And besides that, I am also acupuncturist and Tibetan medicine. I see there is still some. It's not working, or is it working? Yeah, alle due. Va bene. Perfetto. Alessandro, grazie mille. So the translator is there. Okay, so having my medical background and also Eastern background in Chinese and Tibetan medicine, this is actually, it started 20 years ago when I met Lama Ganchen. And since that time on, we went to many conferences. So this week, as we do it now, that we have teachings in the morning with Lama Michel, and then in the afternoon or whenever during the day, we have Western lectures. This was very common to do like this. So we have modern way of looking to the subjects, and from a modern point of view, from the Buddhist point of view. So hopefully this can contribute all together. So I like to start with this first slide: how to stay healthy in modern times. Okay, so my first question is, how healthy are we? Just, we're healthy? How many? Please raise the hands. We think we're healthy? Just what you think. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Slowly, some more hands. Okay, how healthy are we? Okay, okay. Now it's okay. 10 out of 50. Okay, so good. Okay, it's a very open question, but how healthy are we? Okay, it's a good question, I think, to start with, because not so easy to give an answer for that. But the next slide maybe shows already some answers on that. Let's have a look if it's working. I think already the battery left, but we do like this. So what we see here, and I will explain it, this is a slide over 1,000 people, and this is in regards to Holland, but you can easily see this amount also in the whole world, in Western countries especially. And what do we see here is, for each 1,000 patients, in the beginning of the life, 0 to 4 years, we see that 1/5 has one chronic disease. And over time, in the age, and this is, you see, this bar is for men and this one is for women, you see that the amount of people who have at least one chronic disease increases immensely. Up to the age here of 85, almost every person has at least one chronic disease. What do we mean with a chronic disease? Is at least something that either we have to take medication for, or a severe disease like cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer, respiratory problems. So you can add whatever of it, but if you look at the end of our age, most people have something. Is that strange? Okay, let's have a look for that. The average in which we have no problem, it was 55 years. So 55 years, normally we had no chronic disease at all. This was in 1980. And what we see over time is that this is in decline. So we see for men and for women over the years, so the last 30 years, on average, we live longer, but we live shorter with health. So we have life with more chronic diseases. And even though we put a lot of money in our healthcare system, because this line is about how much money we put into healthcare system and that we spend for each person, even though we spend a lot of money per person, this line is not increasing. So this is worrying us, because even though the healthcare system tries to take care of us, no, we see that we are having more diseases. So the life expectancy without chronic diseases has decreased by 10 years for men and as much as 15 years for women since the 1980s. So that's something. All right, then I want to show you something else, because in the 1900s, more or less the main types of diseases that we were facing had to do with infection diseases. It was either war that we died of, infectious diseases like tuberculosis, pneumonia, and also diarrhea. In the past we died out of it. We even more or less forgot that it could be so severe. Heart diseases were there, but not that big, 8% of the total. Injuries was big, and cancer was already existing, but not that much. Bronchitis, sure. And diphtheria, also a disease that we hardly see anymore. And over time, you see that there was a big change. So this is a slide from 1997, but you see the change that the infectious diseases became less, and these chronic diseases became far more. And the healthcare system is still mainly based on infectious disease that we try to fight with, no, with antibiotics and all these medications. But all these chronic diseases that we are facing nowadays, we did not easily yet cope with this immense amount of diseases. So these chronic diseases are also called non-communicable diseases, the NCDs. And it is a result of genes, but not that much as we thought it would be. In the past we thought it's our genes and I'm just a victim out of my genes. But that's not the whole story. To be honest, genes, if you have really a genetic heritage in your genes, it's just for 2 or 3% of the whole population. All the rest has to do something with how we live, and how the way we live, how it interacts with our genes. So we call epigenetics. More comes about that in other talks. Then there are reasons about psychological aspects that are in relation how we get sick. Anxiety, stress, depression. We have socio-economic aspects that make us sick. Of course, the environment and how we behave. So all these aspects results in this amount of chronic diseases. And here you can see again the 4 main types of the chronic diseases. It's of cardiovascular, cancer, diabetes, and chronic respiratory diseases. And these 4 diseases covers 80% of these chronic diseases that we have nowadays, and that also we die of. And just to give already a clue, these kind of diseases, we can prevent them through our lifestyle. So I'll show you in a minute some more about that. At the moment, more or less 74% of all deaths worldwide are related to this non-chronic, to this chronic disease, the NCDs, the non-communicable diseases. And just to show you some numbers, and they're quite shocking, and some of you already are quite aware of it. For some people, it's new. That cardiovascular diseases are all the diseases that has to do with our veins and with our heart. It is more or less 2.5 million each year that people die of 1/3 of the death worldwide has to do with heart and all the veins in our body. And what is also important to see is that 75% of this group of cardiovascular diseases happens in low and middle income countries. So you think maybe, is Italy a middle or low income country? So maybe we are not in this group, but as we all know, there's middle income, more or less 80% of the world has low or middle income. So if we look at the risk factors of, for example, this cardiovascular disease, you already see in the right here that it's related to high blood pressure, unhealthy diet, diabetes, cholesterol, overweight, tobacco, all different types of lifestyle. So on one side it's worrying, at the other side lifestyle, we can do something about it. But if you don't know that these things are causing diseases, then we are here in this nice chair on the beach side, not knowing that there is coming ahead a huge wave towards us. And it's better that we already are prepared. The same counts for oncology. We know that there is more and more cancer worldwide. And no need to go into it in each detail, but 1 out of 6 deaths is related to cancer nowadays. If we look at diabetes, we see that in the 1980s, there were, for example, in Europe, 5.3% they were having diabetes. And just in 35 years, it improved from 33 million people to 64 million people. So wherever we look, we see these increases. Then the last one, also in relation to diabetes, worldwide nowadays, we see this immense continuation, and also the prediction is that we not have found yet a solution for it. So we're not heading towards the right direction, you could say. One of the risk factors that you could see already is about obesity. And maybe the ones who don't have obesity, you think, oh, I'm at the good side of the story. But, and later on I will talk some more about it, obesity is not only seen from the outside. So the part that is not healthy, we call visceral fat. So we can be obese inside our body, even though we are slim. And this has to do with the type of food we take. And so this is quite difficult, actually, to say that maybe someone who has overweight is more healthy compared to one who is slim, but is eating a lot of junk food and has inside a lot of obesity, especially around the liver. So obesity is a difficult subject. Later on in the week, I will talk a little bit more about it, but also just to show a little bit about the situation in which we are now. These are predictions for the coming 10 years, that there is also a huge amount of obesity, as you can see here. So the first part of my talk is not so positive, let's say. Are we healthy? Well, maybe individually, yes, we are healthy. But at the same time, we are inside of modern times, that there is a lot coming up towards us, and some of us have already some diseases in regards to what I'm showing. And besides the diseases, we also have still the climate that's worrying us. So are we healthy? Yes, maybe no. All right. Just going back to the first slide I showed, you can see here that on average, the person of 65 years, 80% has already at least one chronic disease. And maybe we think, well, okay, this is normal. No, this is what it is now, but it don't have to be like that. I show you some examples. Does anyone know about the blue zones? Can I please see some raising hands? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 5, 6. Yeah. Some people know about blue zone. Actually, blue zones are places in the world where people are becoming very old. They're healthy, and they're doing a lot of research why actually they are healthy and in old age. And it's interesting, these people above 100 years old, they don't have these chronic diseases. Some of them are still in a very good shape. So we nowadays more or less think if you get old, you get diseases. But in fact, that's the question. It wasn't in the past like this. Sure, some of the people had diseases. Also, we could see in the first slide, cancer already existed, but in a less frequency and a less amount. So yes, we have some examples. And then this is a very interesting tribe in Bolivia, and it's called the Tsimane. And the Tsimane, they live mostly from plants and animals that they find in the forests. And they have the most healthiest veins compared to other countries in the world. So here you can see this is a slide that's related to the calcium levels, and calcium levels says blood about atherosclerosis. And atherosclerosis is related to these heart diseases, as I showed before. And here you can see men and women that the Tsimane, they have hardly any of these calcifications. While, for example, here in the USA, the level of calcifications is sky high. And that's interesting. So you can say, maybe they do something with their lifestyle that's interesting for us. How come that they're in such good shape? And one other very interesting scientific researcher, Dr. Willett, he already did in the year 2002 a huge research on these main diseases: colon cancer, stroke, heart diseases, and type 2 diabetes. And he saw that 70 to 90% of these diseases can be prevented by lifestyle changes. So there is hope. Again, this is why I put the so. In our Tibetan, we say so is something that brings hope, okay? But I like to go in some more detail. So what causes these chronic diseases, this pandemic in which we are? And sure, this week is about lifestyle, but I want to show once more that it's not all about lifestyle, of course, because a part of the problems in which we are in are related to lifestyle, are related to environment, socio-economic problems, the access to healthcare, and also what I was mentioning, the genes that we have. So some people have bad luck, you can say, have some medical background that was not due to a lifestyle but to other causes. So it is important that we don't say, okay, it's your fault, I could have done something for my problem. Sometimes yes, but also a lot of times no. I think this part is important to say. And just one other slide I wanted to show is that often we think, okay, health is related to a good healthcare system, for example. But if you see here, health, 40% of our health is mostly related to the socio-economic status in which we live. 30% of our health is related to our behavior, 20% to healthcare, and 10% it is related to the environment. So some things we cannot have influence on, for example here, but let's have a look at our behavior and lifestyle. So, and to understand these chronic diseases, I would like to start to explain something about evolutionary medicine. Also, Lama just mentioned in the forest this revolution that we are in, the industrial revolution. And maybe you think it's a funny way to depict ourselves in which state we are nowadays. But the trouble is that it's quite correct that in the last 5 generations, we are facing a lot of changes inside of our body and minds. So let's have a look what we can learn from the past. So 4 million years ago, we already had these hunter-gatherers in a very early stage of upright position, and these humans were eating fruits, plants, nuts, insects, and fibers. And there were our ancient family, our ancestors. And 65% of the daily intake was related to plants. Oh, now it goes out of the cell. Okay. Interesting. And so it's helping me to speed up a bit, maybe. So it's important to understand, okay, what was it that created at that time for us energy? And there were, as we call it, simple carbohydrates. So we had just glucose and fructose, and it was in seasonal ways, no? That we had moments that the fruit was abundant. We had moments that we didn't have the foods at all. And just very shortly and also very superficial, but just to get some idea, the carbs create for us energy, the fats create energy, and in case of need, we can also create energy out of proteins. The proteins that we have in our body mainly is our muscles. So in case of a lack of food, we also start to use our proteins. These are called the micronutrients. And so, to understand the story later on, I explain a little bit more. Our body uses this glucose, and this glucose is very important to survive, and the fats as fuel. And the carbohydrates are the body's preferred and primary energy source, of course, and especially for the brain this is important, because the brain uses glucose. And 25% of our energy intake daily goes only to our brain. 25% also goes to our immune system. So a lot of energy that we have as intake goes to these two aspects of our body. Later on I'll explain a bit more about that. And also to generate energy, this glucose is very helpful, very sufficient. So just a little bit more. As already mentioned, it were very simple carbohydrates. So we had the fruits, the fructose, and the glucose. And they're almost similar, fructose and glucose. One is a little bit sweeter compared to the other. And this gives very quickly a high spike of sugar in our system. And we need that. And if we don't need the sugar, we store it in our liver and in our muscles. In the muscles, it's called it's called glucocaine, and it's through the insulin that the glucose is absorbed and in our body and put away in the form of glycogen actually. And also it's very important to understand that the food that we ate 4 million years ago had a lot of fibers. 65% of our food was plant-based, so we had a lot of fibers. Okay. And we call fibers complex carbohydrates. And also these fats that were in the nuts were polyunsaturated fats. And I will come back to that later, why that is so important. And also these fats are very important as a storage, and I'll come back later to that. But if we eat food and to store it through fat, we do through triglycerides. So it's another process how we digest the glucose, and it gets in the body through a storage of fat. Later on, I try to bring all the stories together, okay? So, just to sum up this part, we had this food intake, and that created for 1 million years, for 1 million years, more or less, our whole digestive system. The insulin that was made and how the storage was done through the muscles and the liver. Then we had 3 million years ago a big climate crisis because it became more dry. The forests were not giving enough food anymore, and we started to move more to lakes and to the seaside. And we had a huge advantage of that moment because for the first time in history we started to eat more fat, this unsaturated polyacids. So meat and fish was suddenly a huge part of our diet. And we can see through archaeological findings that over time our brain started to grow very fast. So the brain that we have nowadays uses the most energy compared to all the mammals that we know. This 23% of energy that goes to the brain, it's the most in human beings. So compared to our ancestors, if you follow this way of looking at evolutionary medicine, our brain started to grow more than twice as big as before. And this was the energy intake nowadays. And also this fat that we started to eat, this fat from fish and meat, we use this for our brain to create our brain. So it's a very important type of fat. And the other one is the glucose. And that one also I mentioned, that glucose is very, very important to support this 23%. Okay. What has this to do with all these slides that I showed before? One important aspect is insulin resistant. This is a chemical aspect in our body. And does anyone know this terminology, insulin resistant? Resistance? Some people know. Okay. I'll explain shortly a little bit about it. Because it was a survival mechanism, this insulin resistance. So first to understand what is insulin. So the moment we have our intake of food, the body starts to produce this hormone, insulin. The moment more insulin comes in the bloodstream, locks in this type of receptor, and that moment the cell has an opening and starts to let the glucose pass into our bloodstream. So it goes open and the glucose can enter. This is a very important aspect of insulin. But if the receptors are not working anymore well, and this happens, for example, when we have obesity, or when we get fat, more fat, then there is less glucose that goes inside of the bloodstream and especially inside of the cells, but it stays in the bloodstream. And this was the survival mechanism, what I was talking about, because then the glucose could enter more easily to the brain. Another type of insulin resistance was that the cells had enough glucose and could not absorb any more of glucose, and it stays in the bloodstream. So we have a very strong glucose peak due to insulin resistance. And what is the story about this? Why is this survival mechanism? Because in the past we had only these two type of seasons. We had a wet season and we had a dry season. So in the wet season, of course, there was a lot of food. So we started to eat more fruits, more seeds, more proteins, and we created this fat storage, these fat cells. And we needed it. And over time, as we got more fat, then the insulin resistance starts to manifest, and the glucose stays more in the bloodstream. And why was this? So when the dry season started, and we found some food, the glucose that came out of the food could not be stored in the fat cells because they were blocking, in fact, the glucose intake, and it could easily go to the brain. So this was our survival mechanism. Over time, when we couldn't find anymore the food, we started to use the fat cells. Slowly, over time, they decreased. And when fat cells are very small, they are more sensitive to absorb any form of energy. So any form of food that we had as an intake, we could use it very quickly to store it or to use it. So we call this insulin sensitivity. So in that time, we had this kind of rhythm, and we were making use of glucose in a very efficient way, and also our storage in the body in a very efficient way. But then we go to another phase of our history, as we know. Oh, sorry. This is more or less 10,000 years ago. We started with our cultivation of grains, the legumes, the dairy products. We started to eat more cheese, more milk, more grains, and these were complex carbohydrates. So we created more and more energy. So we could do less because we created more energy, but it had also a downfall. What we know about that time is since we started to introduce agriculture, we see that we got less length. We had more osteoporosis. We got more infections, tooth problems, vitamin deficiency. We started to live shorter, and also our brain started to shrink. And this is due to this type of lifestyle that we started. So this plant-based and fruit and nuts was very healthy for us, but with eating more and more starchy foods, we got already less healthy compared to before. But it also, as we know, had a lot of advantages. No, as we came more together, we didn't have to look that much for the food anymore. We could create some small tribes, and slowly, these groups of hunters and gatherers, they lost, let's say, the fights with the far more organized farmers. The first farmers, they were living in groups, so they could fight easily with these hunter-gatherers. And slowly, we came into this position that we are in now. So we go with huge jumps into history to the next step, and that is the Industrial Revolution. So, because from that time things changed very fast, as we know. This we know all. Stress was introduced, more pollution. We started to walk faster, think faster, eat faster, everything, and change our type of food from more gathering our own products or our own plant to this whole starchy food. Later we started to produce it into bread. And also what I mentioned, we started to eat far more of this latticini, of milk products. All right, let's have a look. So now there was a change in our digestive system because these complex carbs, they are actually very long chain of sugars. What is interesting is that these carbohydrates with these long chains, it does not give this quick glucose peak, but it goes more, more gentle. And we say also that it can be divided in whole grains and refined grains. This is just a slide to give you some overview if we talk about starches, how it works. But this was now our new introduced food. And one more thing, of course, we all know, was this introduction of sugar. And we have this very strong craving for sugar. And before, the sugar was only, of course, the fruits that we could find and the honey. But now it was not only here, something went wrong, but now we also have all this type of food that create far more sugar. So the intake of sugar increased a lot. So if we look at the problems that we have nowadays, we know already the insulin resistance, that if we have more fat in our body and that the body cannot store well the glucose, and the glucose, we have to do something with the glucose peaks that we have, and we store it in the fat, and it creates more insulin resistance. We have higher glucose levels in our bloodstream, and this is a problem. And we don't have any more these moments in life that we are having our fasting moments. And the intake became more of sugars and more of this complex carbs. Okay, let's have a look. And of course, as we know, we started to make our own sugars, the artificial made sugars. Nowadays we have 75 different types of sugars compared to 4 million years ago, glucose and fructose. And just to show a little bit what is the intake that we have now. So we started to measure it in 80/20s. And you see that the amount of sugar is rising each 20 years to this level. And nowadays, we have more or less per day 124 grams of sugar. And in Europe, it's more or less 100 grams a day. And it should be a day 25 grams for women and children and 36 grams for a day for men. And maybe this gram is not so easy to understand how much that is, but just one can of Coke consists already more than this 25 gram a day. So this sugar intake creates trouble. Okay. Then we started to process our food. From unprocessed foods, we went to processed food. And as we also know, we have nowadays this ultra-processed food, in which we also mold it and mill it. And that makes also a big change in our food. And I'll show you later on what kind of impact that has in our health. Because nowadays, if we go into the supermarket, 60% of our food in the trolleys is this ultra-processed food. So junk food is it tastes too good, it's too cheap, too available, too efficient, and too convenient to resist. And just recently, in January 2024, a huge article for the ones who are having a medical background, or if you like to have a look at it more from a scientific point of view, where I present this data from. This is a huge research that has been done to have a look what the effects are of this ultra-processed food. And they came up to this result. Ultra-processed food is linked to 32 harmful effects to health. So we have 60% of our food is based of this ultra-processed food. We have everywhere sugar. We cannot resist it. And we have a system inside of our body of this insulin resistance that when we eat this sugar and we have more and more of this sugar and we get more overweight, either we can see it or we can't see it, the body cannot store all this sugar and creates high glucose peaks. And all these factors create inflammation and is related to these chronic diseases. So let's have a look how this inflammation works, because inflammation, that's the big, let's say, thing. That is, you could say, the whole part that is underneath this chronic diseases. Inflammation is not something strange. We know from our age, because over time we create more and more inflammation. And it is also called inflammaging. So during lifetime we have less metabolism activity and we get older. And this is a natural, normal process. Some people say, okay, it's a natural process, but what's more creating this inflammation, huh? And that we get older? Well, have a look at this inflammation. Every meal that we take creates inflammation. Also healthy food, that's the interesting part. So either we eat an apple or we eat fruits, other type of fruits or vegetables, it gives an inflammation peak. And this is normal. And because in this moment that we have this intake, it is something that is not natural for us. Still, we eat every day. For the body, it creates a moment of inflammation. And there is also cell damage in that moment. But if we eat just normal and healthy food, the body found its own system to recover and come back to its normal state. So this is a normal process that we see during and after meals, and is related to this inflammation and slowly over time inflammaging. But these peaks of inflammation is related to what we eat, how often we eat, and how much we eat. And here comes another aspect of this chronic disease. Because I borrowed this slide from Rogier. If we see the amount of food that we eat, these bars show this would be the amount of food from here unto here that would be good for us to eat, to stay healthy. And you can see in most countries worldwide, we eat far too much of meat and of starchy vegetables. That is good for us. Too much eggs. And then you see slowly the ones that are important for us, for example, the fish, that is the polyunsaturated fats. Not that much. Vegetables in different countries, very shortage. Fruit, not enough. The legumes, the healthy ones of the legumes, not enough. The whole grains and the nuts. So you see here that we started to eat also in not the right, let's say, amounts. And maybe you remember from the first story, but red meat was good. Yes, but they ate also a lot of plants and a lot of nuts and a lot of fruits. And then another thing to understand this inflammation is the following. Nowadays in our food is a lot of palm oil. And when palm oil gets heated, it gets another structure and causes inflammation. This inflammation is very high with palmatic fat. And nowadays almost in every type of food is put this type of fat. We spoke already about sugars and the starch, but to sell the products well, we like sugar. So in every the pots that the package, also the pizza that we find in the supermarkets, it looks fresh, but there is sugar added, and it is with all these starch products. Then there is a lot of salt added. I'm not going into the subject of salt today, but too much salt, of course, also not good. And then the last two are very interesting in the sense of inflammation, because this ones that gives more taste to the products, and the E numbers, and also they call ages. We nowadays know that this is really not good for our microbiome. So we need to have a healthy gut, and especially these two, the emulgators and the flavorings, they create problems inside of our intestines, and also called the phenomena leaky gut. So due to time, I cannot go too much into detail about this, but in this ultra-processed food, a lot of ingredients are there that are increasing inflammation. And what is lacking that decreases inflammation are the fibers, the vitamins, the minerals, and also the antioxidants. So this is what we nowadays know and understand about ultra-processed food, why it is unhealthy for us. And so coming back to the part that we started with, how come that we have so much chronic diseases? It is related to this process of inflammation. And what we see, unfortunately, once we get in this process of inflammation, we don't get back actually to this normal state that we used to have, in a state that the body is in complete balance, but we get more and more in a state of inflammation. And now I talked about food, but to make the story more complete, it's not alone only food that creates this inflammation, but it's also that we know nowadays that if we have a lot of stress, this increases inflammation. If we don't move well, same. If we smoke, if we don't sleep well, if we are too stressed and we drink some alcohol to reduce our stress, the alcohol in itself creates inflammation. We saw that the ultra-processed foods changes our microbiome, and normally our microbiome is the one that helps to overcome our cell damage, and that one is not healthy. We have a lot of plastics and all these kind of things in our environment. That's also not of help. And of course, we spoke already about the obesity. So these factors nowadays, they think they all interact more or less at the same time, like a very complicated system. in this process of chronic inflammation. Okay, so this chronic inflammation is at the basis of all this starting point of these diseases of cancer, of diabetes, of Alzheimer, but it does also another thing, and it creates an inflammation also of the brain. And one of the thoughts that we have nowadays why obesity is so huge worldwide is the idea that as we eat so much sugar, the glucose in the bloodstream gets extremely high. It creates inflammation of the brain, and the brain normally has hormones that respond to us, that we know, okay, we have to reduce our amount of intake, we should stop with eating, but it does not give anymore the right signals to the body of eating and not eating. So due to this chronic inflammation of the brain, also fat cells are now in a kind of ongoing overweight if you are in this process. So these are some current ideas about the situation in which we are in at this moment. Due to time, I skip just a few slides of more about this inflammation explanation. If you're interested in, we can talk afterwards some more. But I also like to go to the solution, because I think it's good that we know the problem. And I think it's also very important that we are aware where the problems are, because then the solutions makes it more easy to work on. And these days, we are here for a wellness week to learn more about many different subjects. And I will show a little bit later about the nutrition. But as we know, also exercise is very important. And how to reduce stress. Rogier is going to talk about that, and also how to change our habits, how to improve our sleep, and also how we can be in good relationships. These are different aspects that we are now inside of healthcare trying to improve about healthy lifestyle changes. And if you make your changes in one of these 6 areas, we know that you reduce this inflammation. So there are ways to reduce inflammation and activate the body in another direction. So just starting a little bit with the exercise. I'm not going, of course, into detail how this works, but exercise, it's very interesting that it can reduce this inflammation. And besides exercise, it has many other benefits, as it can control the weight, the immune system gets stronger, it's good for our mood, it reduces anxiety and depression, can improve sleep. If you sport too late, of course, then the sleep will not improve. It's also good for sexual function, so for some people also interesting. And of course, I hope it can bring fun. But these are things that we know about movements. And if you think, okay, but what is good movements? Where to start? Just 30 minutes of walking a day is already enough. And there are some researches done, and this is, I think, very interesting. We think we need to we go to the sports, to the palestra, to the sports hall, to do very intensive sports to get the best results. But that's not the case. What we see that 60 to 70% of the effects of exercise for the body and to reduce inflammation, to get all positive results, is just by doing 20 to 30 minutes a day, mild exercise. So you can walk through the forest, and that's already 60 to 70% of the effect. Perfect. If you go to the the gym, you can improve a bit the effects, but not that much more. 10 to 20% up to that. So we need to move more. But you can choose whatever you like to do. Of course, you can do yoga, you can do running, whatever it suits you the most. Then looking at food, what is nowadays then a good way to eat well? We need to improve the amount of vegetables. So please increase the amount of vegetables during lunch and also, for example, during the evening. And the fruits, many people say, oh, but fruits, they have these sugars. Yes, but there are these natural sugars, and they have, besides the sugar, also these minerals and fibers and vitamins. So fruits are very healthy, but it's good to eat the whole fruit, not only the juice of, for example, the orange. Then about the grains. The old grains are very healthy. So you can eat of them quite a lot, but reduce, of course, the amount of rice and pasta. In this slide, they say only 10%, but other slides I will show you later on, or other food experts say that you can eat more grains. Then it's important to have these healthy fats, because also fat, we got a little bit, let's say, insecure which type of fat is good. I will show you later on a slide with the healthy fats, but we need to eat the right and the healthy fats and also the proteins, okay? So this unsaturated, the polyunsaturated fats we can find in nuts, in plant oils, and here we have a lot of olive oil. It's the omega-3 fatty acids, as we know. So this Mediterranean diet, as we talk about, with a lot of vegetables, nuts, and oil, olive oil is a very good one to increase these polyunsaturated fats and decreases risks of diseases like, for example, also cancer. The fish we know, avocado, all these kind of seeds, egg yolk also, peanut butter, you wouldn't expect, but then the healthy peanut butter, and also tofu. So these are just some examples of this polyunsaturated fat. Then the fibers we need. And just to show you one interesting research that they did about the effects of fiber in regards to this inflammation process, they asked young guys to eat for 3 months this type of, well, I don't know if you want to call it food, but something. And then they compared this group of young guys who were eating for 3 months only this food to the guys who also got this type of food. And you can also have a discussion about how healthy this one is, but at least it's high in fibers. And what they saw only after 3 months of this diet compared to the ones who were eating only these snacks without the fibers and the one with the fibers was the inflammation compared to the one who had the fibers was significantly lower compared to the ones who were not eating the fibers. Okay? So fibers are very, very important to reintroduce in our daily food. Then what type of these cereals are good? For example, here you can see that quinoa is a very healthy one. Brown pasta is okay and means with fibers. The oats and the brown rice are these whole starches. But the white pasta and the white rice, they advise just to take a little of it. And also, unfortunately, the part of the slide is not visible, but here you can see in the beginning of the day, it's good to have a good meal. Along the day, it's better to eat less. So in the evening, eat less compared to lunchtime, for example. Then we saw, for example, the sleep quality. Also to improve sleep quality, they saw in scientific research, in research that they did, that if you do an intermittent fasting, just only 8 hours a day that you don't eat, you drink, but you don't eat, already improves sleep. If you do an intermittent fasting only 2 days a month, so 2 days a month you eat only 1 meal a day, it has already for 2-3 weeks after these 2 days an effect of reducing this inflammation over whatever you eat afterwards. So it's very interesting. So we sometimes think, oh, I need to do a lot to improve my health. But the interesting thing is we have to be smart to become more healthier. So sometimes skipping a meal, very healthy. Doesn't mean that for everyone, of course, this is the same. And we have to be aware that for one, fasting can be possible. For another, it's not working. But anyhow, I show you some suggestions. Then also, I show you this data that, for example, people who were having depression and anxiety symptoms, when they start to do more exercise, eat more healthy, as we talked before, you see that it's already automatically starts to decrease without going to a psychiatrist, without going to a psychologist. But by moving more, eating more healthier, we can do already a lot by ourselves. Then just to round up, because we're almost there, and it's time to have our own dinner. There are so many different diets, and some people say, but which diet is the best? Actually, it's very interesting. The best is simple. Eat normal food, natural food, not too much, and most plants. This is if you take the summary of all the articles that were done and all the research that was done about these different type of diets, then all of them come to the same conclusion. Okay, take all the natural products, fresh products, don't eat too much, and eat more plant-based. So I like to make things simple. So here you see, again, eat varied and moderate. Don't fill the stomach completely with food. 50% of food, 25% of liquids, and also empty stomach now and then. More vegetables and fruits, fresh and high in fibers. Avoid the processed foods and the soft drinks, of course. Reduce the amount of alcohol. Put more of the right fats in your food. So here the olive oil is perfect. And all that is that we eat from fried food has a lot of omega-6 and also omega-9. And these are not the right type of fat. So be aware of the right fat. Reduce the amount of meat. And also fermented products are very healthy. I'm not having the time to go into that subject, but also fermented products are very good for the microbiome. Tomorrow, Anne Vossi will give her lecture, and she also, one of these days, tomorrow or the day after, she will talk about microbiome. If you think, oh, jongens, my goodness, this was quite a story, what to remember out of it, you can also remember this. The most important thing to remember about food labels is that you should avoid food that have labels. Very easy. Okay? And then if you want to have it more easy, if you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. Okay? So I wish you a very nice week. And I hope we can all create new habits and leave some old habits based on these insights that we will gain this week. And have a good dinner and a good evening. Are there any questions? If you have a question, you can raise your hand, then we can just pass the mic.
Hi, thank you very much. When you say eating less, do you mean eating less in quantity, but maybe several times, or eating fewer times?
Yes. Both. Yes. So eating less of food in general and also less moments during the day is good. So you can do in both ways. Huh? And most of the time we have a habit that we eat too much and too often. But if you are, for example, a person that already has 3 meals a day and you really need this type of food, then of course this does not count because it depends on what you eat. But I did not show one slide, but in general, over time, we started to eat far more amount. In the past, for example, one hamburger was a size of this. Nowadays, the hamburger is size like this. So, in this sense, it's better to eat less and not so often. For example, if you have stomach problems, then we recommend to eat small amounts of food along the day, not to create too much stomach problems. So it is also depends on a person's background, okay? So you cannot always say this is the best to do for everyone, okay? Other questions for this moment? Or we are already satisfied with this information? Ok, buona serata e noi continuiamo.